August 2009. Two Topeka women brutally slain in their own home. A young girl found clutching her mother's lifeless body. Now police want your help solving this vicious murder. Tonight, we profile that and other unsolved crimes on Capital Cold Cases.
This is a Crime Stoppers cold case investigation. I'm Bill Curtis, urging you to help local law enforcement solve this or any felony crime by calling 234-0007. Now the host of Capital Cold Cases, investigator Dawn McWilliams.
Hello, I'm Crime Stoppers investigator Dawn McWilliams. Join me as we investigate several unsolved mysteries here in the Capital area. We will also take a more in-depth look at one specific double murder. Before we investigate these cases together, I want to tell you why we're here. Crime Stoppers is your local crime-fighting organization that forwards tip information anonymously to law enforcement to help solve crimes. Capital Area Crime Stoppers is bringing this program to you in hopes that you have the last piece of this puzzle needed to solve these cases. Tonight's first Capital Cold Case, the 2009 murder of 34-year-old Maureen McKnight. Investigative reporter Steve Fry joins me with details. Who was Maureen McKnight?
In October 2009, Maureen McKnight was a 34-year-old woman who lived on the east side of Central Park. She was something of a volunteer in the community in that she would go around to collect funds for people who had had bad luck or had been ill or things of that nature.
What were the circumstances around her murder?
It was in the afternoon of about 3:30 p.m. On October 26th. There was a large group of 40 to 50 men in the park that were involved in a large fist fight. All of a sudden, a man with a gun fired several shots, and she was struck by one of the shots.
I understand that there's a cell phone video of the shooting of McKnight.
Police are trying to find what has been reported to be a video shot from a cell phone that includes the shooting of Maureen McKnight. So far, they have not found it. The Crime Stoppers tip line has offered rewards for the video, but it has not surfaced so far.
2 years after Miss McKnight was murdered, there was a march. Tell me a little bit about the purpose of that march, what it was for.
The purpose of the march was to observe the second anniversary of the death of Ms. McKnight. And so the family, including her 5 children, were there, as well as her mother and some of her best friends. And so they marched from 10th Street over to the park. They put up balloons and other things to observe the incident from 2 years earlier. They were hoping that it would spur somebody's conscience who might have the videotape of the shooting to come forward with that videotape. As far as I know, it has not surfaced yet.
Is the family and are Miss McKnight's children confident that the perpetrator of this crime will be apprehended?
I think they are. I think they believe that someone in that crowd knows who the gunman is, that someone can identify that gunman, and that if they will approach the police with the information through Crime Stoppers, they can provide that information anonymously.
Maureen McKnight left behind 5 children. Help us bring closure to her family and this case. If you have a tip for police, call the Crime Stoppers hotline at 234-0007. Now, a word with Shawnee County District Attorney Chad Taylor. What do you believe to be the most difficult part of investigating cold cases?
It would have to be the loss of evidence. Obviously, as people age and the events get further away, their memories fade, they aren't as clear. Individuals that we would have to have as witnesses who die, and the lack of really technology that we have today and are so dependent upon today that didn't exist 25 or 30 years ago in crime scene investigation and in how those cases were prepared and handled.
Tonight's second capital cold case, the 1962 murder of Daphne Rhodes, an affluent young woman whose death left Topeka residents in shock. Reporter Tim Rencher has the details.
Tim, you've been a reporter with the Topeka Capital Journal for over 25 years, encountered a number of crime situations, murders, homicides. One in particular that I'd like to talk about is Daphne Rhodes, a beautiful young socialite from New York and a Menninger patient who was murdered in our city. Tell me what you know about that case.
Daphne Rhodes grew up in a life of privilege. Her father was a wealthy industrialist. Her uncle was the U.S. ambassador to India. She went to Sarah Lawrence College. After college, she got married and then divorced. And then in 1961, at age 25, she came to Topeka to be a patient at Menninger.
Can you tell me about the events that led up to this particular homicide?
Well, on the evening of June 2nd, 1962, Daphne went to a party in southwest Topeka involving, 8 to 10 other Menninger patients. At that party, she kind of made a scene when she found out that another woman there who was a good friend of hers was going to be leaving this area. At the end of the party, she left with a male friend and took him to Menninger. But early the next morning, some friends checking on her found her body in her apartment.
Was anybody at the party able to give the police any information regarding this particular incident?
Police interviewed everybody who attended the party, but none of the information they provided was able to lead to an arrest.
Can you give any details regarding this particular homicide?
There had been no sign of forced entry to her home. She generally left the back door unlocked. She was found strangled in the living room. She had been strangled with her own brassiere. She'd also been raped.
Why did this particular case draw so much attention?
Part of it was because this was an attractive, wealthy person who was here to Topeka, a person of money. Part of it was because the violent nature of the crime. You know, she was strangled, she was beaten. Part of it was because of the scandalous nature. There was a sexual assault, she was strangled with her brassiere. And part of it was because it was unsolved. Topeka police worked very hard. They tracked down lots of leads, and they were never able to figure out who did it.
Can you tell us any details about the aftermath of this crime? Any type of evidence or information that brings us up to present day that can help solve this crime?
At varying times in the years since, police have gotten tips regarding it, but nothing to lead to an arrest. So 50 years later, it remains unsolved, but there are still hopes of solving it enough that it's being featured on this program today.
Do you have the key piece of information for solving this 50-year-old murder? Call Crime Stoppers. Once again, that number is 234-0007. When we come back, the murder that left 2 women dead and a daughter to discover the aftermath.
Hi, I'm Mike Warswick, CEO of Wolf's Camera. I, along with the entire Wolf's family, stand up against crime in the capital area. We support the work of the Capital Area Crime Stoppers program and this production of Capital Cold Cases. We urge you to stand beside us to make our community a safer place for all. Anyone with information regarding these cases can call, text, or go on the web to leave an anonymous tip for law enforcement.
Before we take a more in-depth look at our featured case, it is important to remember that you can remain anonymous and forward tip information to law enforcement. When you call, text, or go to the web to contact Crime Stoppers, you are not calling the police. If you have information regarding any crime, you can call Crime Stoppers at 234-0007 or text CRIMES and start your tip with Top Tip before texting your message. You can also go to TopekaCrimeStoppers.com. Remember, your identity is always anonymous and is protected by law. Now, join me as we investigate the double murder of Walia Tyndall and Leah Schmuck. These two young women were killed in their southeast Topeka home, leaving behind many family members and a young child without a mom, looking for answers.
It started out as any other typical day that I would show up to work. Upon arriving in the briefing room, I was notified that there had been a double shooting and that I needed to respond to it.
August 20th, 2009, a summer morning that stayed with Topeka Police Detective Steve Atkins ever since. The crime scene? A mobile home in southeast Topeka. The victims, 28-year-old Leah Schmuck and 29-year-old Walia Tyndall.
When I arrived, there were already several marked patrol cars there. Several uniformed officers were out speaking to individuals. There were also some family members of the victims that had shown up. It was what I would consider a little bit of controlled chaos.
I was at my grandma's house getting my daughter ready for school, and my grandma says, "Your mom's on the phone," and she seemed a little upset. I get on the phone and I say hello, and my mom just falls to pieces. And I think it initially hit me when we pulled around the back side of the trailer, and there was no front door. There were cops everywhere.
Both women had died from gunshot wounds, their bodies discovered by a relative. Leah's 6-year-old daughter was in the home as well. Family members say the young girl found her mother, covered her up, and put her head on her chest.
It was determined that Leah's daughter had no knowledge of what had occurred. She was asleep, and at that time, upon my arrival, she was in the back of a patrol car where she was safe.
In the investigation that followed, police determined that because of the remote location of the mobile home, the suspect or suspects must have driven to the crime scene. There, they entered through the front door where Leah and Walia were sleeping in the living room. They shot each woman, then fled the scene.
When the suspect or suspects left the scene, they more likely would have been in a hurry to get away. They just committed a very heinous crime and they want to get themselves as far away from it as they can. Indications would be that you would get away quickly in a vehicle. They would have probably been driving at a high rate of speed, out of place at that time of the morning, leaving that area of town, someone that wouldn't normally be there at that time of the day.
Family members say Leah Schmuck was getting her life back on track just as it was tragically cut short. A Topeka native, Leah had recently returned to her hometown to focus on her family.
She was a tomboy, she was tough, she was street smart, she just thought she could take the world on.
She was loving, she was caring, she didn't deserve what she got. She deserved so much more because she was trying to fulfill her dreams.
Walia Tyndall's family calls her loving, outgoing, and determined. They say family was always first and foremost in her life. Walia's mother recalls the last time she spoke to her daughter.
She called me the night before she was killed. It was raining. It was a big storm, and I said, "Girl, you know I don't talk on the phone when it's storming." And she said to me, "I just called to tell you I love you," and she was singing that song. And I said to her, I said, "Okay, you told me now, hang up." She said, "Wait, I gotta tell you again." So she sang it, the verse again. And so I said, "I'm hanging up, you crazy." And I hung up the phone laughing. And when I think about that being the last time I heard her voice, I'm glad that she called me on that stormy night.
Pursuing a number of leads, police carried out search warrants in several counties. They also learned that this was not the first time that Leah and Willia's home had been a crime scene.
It was learned that both Walia and Leah had been the victims of a previous crime. Several weeks prior to this incident, a report was made to the Topeka Police Department and the Topeka Fire Department that the trailer that both women lived in had intentionally been set on fire.
The residents woke to the fire already in process. Their smoke alarm was sounding. When they got to the front door, they actually physically smelled gasoline. When they opened the door, there were flames present blocking their exit. They had to use a secondary exit to get out of the house.
Is there any question in your mind whether this was an arson fire or not?
No, I knew that from the time I investigated that I was dealing with an arson fire, and it's still classified an arson fire today.
After the arson, Leah and Walia's family pleaded with them to leave their mobile home. Neither would.
They were very afraid for their lives at that point.
She wouldn't leave her house.
She didn't want to leave her house.
She wanted to make sure that nothing else happened. She wanted to be home. She would not let anybody make her leave her home.
And I said, Walia, just come home. Just come home. I've got all these empty bedrooms. And she said to me, I live a life that I don't have to be afraid to go to bed at night.
At this time, investigators aren't saying whether or not the arson is related to the murders. In the months and years since the crime, detectives have pursued several leads, but Atkins says they are still one step away from making a strong case.
We have information that we believe is good information. There's just a little bit more that we need to push us over that point that would make this an excellent case.
Detective Atkins needs anyone who might have information on this case to call the Crime Stoppers hotline. He says every tip is of value. Any piece of information could be the missing clue he needs to solve this case.
There are people that have information about this crime. I know that they have information about this crime, but are unwilling to come forward in fear for their own safety. If this was their family member, if this was their mother or their sister or their daughter, they would hope someone would come forward with the information if they had it, put themselves in that person's shoes to live what this family is living through, knowing that there are people out there with information but are unwilling at this time to come forward with it.
Somebody around here knows what happened to my daughter. And it hasn't come out yet, but God's got this. And his eyes are everywhere. You can't hide from him.
I would implore anybody to please come forward and give us some kind of closure with our daughter's death. I can't do anymore.
When we return to Capital Cold Cases, help me investigate 2 additional unsolved murders in our community.
Hi, I'm Brent Bowles with Schindel Pest Services and Schindel Lawn and Landscape. The Schindel Services team stands up against crime in the Topeka, Shawnee County area. We support the production of this Capital Cold Cases to help solve crime in our community. As we stand up, so should you. Do your part to help solve crime by calling Crime Stoppers at 234-0007. And remember, all tips are anonymous.
Our next Capital Cold Case, the murder of 23-year-old Shirley Steiner. Was she the victim of a notorious serial killer? Once again, here's Steve Fry.
Steve, tell me about the 1978 murder of Shirley Steiner.
Shirley Steiner was a 23-year-old medical technician at a laboratory in downtown Topeka. She had arrived at work on the morning of July 22nd, 1978, when she was kidnapped at gunpoint by a man who took her in his car.
What were the details of this particular crime?
The investigators with the Shawnee County Sheriff's Office believe that she arrived at work, she got out of her car, and that a man forced her into his car, then drove west to I-70 and eventually ended up at the Mission Creek interchange. He apparently panicked when he heard some sirens going by, ordered her out of the car, and shot her.
I've heard that there's somewhat of a twist to this case. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Investigators believe that she was shot by a man named Tony Joe Lorette, who was a Topekan. He was also a serial killer who had been jogging past the labs and apparently had seen her coming and going to her job. Lorette later was convicted of a murder in Missouri and was executed in 1995.
However, this case remains open.
Yes, it does. It is open. The Sheriff's Department has not cleared it as a solved case.
Was Shirley Steiner a victim of Tony Joe Lorette? Your tip could help police put an end to this question once and for all. Call Crime Stoppers at the number on your screen. Now I'm joined again by Shawnee County District Attorney Chad Taylor. As District Attorney, you and your office have been highly successful in prosecuting cold cases. What do you attribute this to?
I think a lot of our success has to do with the good and positive working relationship that we have with law enforcement and all the different law enforcement agencies that we interact with. The ability to identify those cases, get them off the shelves, tear them apart, look at them from a new and fresh perspective, and then ultimately have the diligence to follow through on all of those details that have to be worked out.
Tonight's final capital cold case. The 1974 murder of 59-year-old Rosemary Renault. Again, Tim Rencher joins me with the details and to explain his close connection to this unsolved case.
Tim, we're going to talk about someone that you knew very well, and that's Rosemary Renault. Can you tell me a little bit about the connection that you had with this particular victim?
Rosemary Renault was my neighbor. At the time that she died in August 1974, she was 59 years old and living just across the alley from my parents and my brothers and I. Rosemary worked at Zerker Photo, and she lived in the same house that her parents had gotten in the late 30s and early 40s. She was kind of a homebody. She did not own a car. She stayed home a lot. Rosemary was a very petite person, 5'4". She was a nice lady. Sometimes our ball would get thrown into her yard and she would come out and throw it back to us.
What are the circumstances of this particular murder?
Well, late on the evening of August 16, 1974, neighbors saw a light on still in Rosemary's house. And then the next day she was found dead. A neighbor saw that there was a chair on her front porch up against the front window. Somebody had used a knife to cut the screen and gone through that window. She apparently had been confronted in her upstairs bedroom and fought like a banshee. A trail of blood stains and broken vases could be followed from that bedroom all the way down to the living room. She was stabbed numerous times in the back and in the chest, but ultimately was strangled to death.
It sounds as though this particular crime is very violent. Are you aware, or did you uncover any potential motives in this particular situation?
I'm not sure exactly what the motive was. Initially, police suggested sexual assault might be involved, but later on said they were investigating it, and it wasn't certain that sexual assault was involved.
Do you think in any way that this particular experience is what drove you to be a reporter for the Capital Journal?
Of course it did. I followed the news reports on this very voraciously, was very interested in the case, and after that I got interested in other cases too. And I decided that as a crime reporter, first of all, you're writing about interesting stuff, and second of all, you can help make the world a better place. You know, if you write a story about a crime, somebody has a tip, they call it in, and it gets solved, and that's cool.
What is your ultimate hope for Rosemary and for her family?
I would hope that this would get solved, if not by, you know, somebody turning in a tip, perhaps by a deathbed confession from somebody.
Help police close this nearly 40-year-old murder. If you can provide any information about the death of Rosemary Renault, call Crime Stoppers at 234-0007.
One of the most important aspects of helping the District Attorney's Office prosecute these cold cases is receiving new tips from the public. The information you have creates valuable leads for law enforcement to follow.
As your sheriff, I know cold case investigations have many roadblocks in the pursuit of justice, what really happened and who is to blame. My deputies and I at the Shawnee County Sheriff's Office appreciate the anonymous tips that have helped us solve many of our crimes. Our work is not done yet. Your tip information is needed to help us solve these cold cases as well.
Crime Stoppers has been a valuable asset to this community for over 30 years. My team and I value the work that Crime Stoppers does, and we depend on information from the community to help obtain justice. In order for us to continue bringing justice and closure to victims' families, your support is still needed.
As your host for Capital Cold Cases, I thank you for viewing our program. You can be a part of the solution and help solve crime in our community by supporting Crime Stoppers.